I'm Alice Loxton and I present documentaries over on History Hit TV. If you're passionate about all things history, sign up to History Hit TV. It's like Netflix but just for history. We've got hours of ad-free documentaries about all aspects of the past. You can get a huge discount from History Hit TV. Make sure you check out the details below and use the code ABSOLUTEHISTORY, all one word, when you sign up. Now, on with the show.
Bonjour mes amis, this UNESCO World Heritage Town is so French you will feel like you're in France, but we're in North America. Bienvenue à Quebec City. Quebec City is one of the oldest cities in Canada, founded in 1608. Its name comes from the Algonquin word for where the river narrows. Today, it is the capital of the Quebec province, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is the only remaining walled city in North America, north of Mexico. But most importantly, it was the first permanent settlement in all of New France. Quebec City sits high upon its perch, overlooking the St. Lawrence River. Why was this location chosen? Well, because in the 1500s, during the Age of Exploration, many European powers were competing for a stake in the New World. During this time period, French explorer Jacques Cartier established his settlement nearby. And then in the 1600s, Samuel de Champlain picked this spot for the future Quebec City. Why? Well, it was the perfect spot to guard against anyone sailing in from the Atlantic. But that history isn't what makes Quebec City so curious. So, here's what I'm curious about in Quebec City. Why is Quebec City so French? Why is there a lower city and an upper city? Why is there a French castle thousands of miles away from France? And what is underneath that castle? What is so royal about Place Royale? Why was this island named after a Roman god? Why is this the Garden of Quebec? Why is this seminary and this chapel important? Why do thousands of pilgrims travel here every year to this extremely artsy and supersized church? So much to be curieux about here in Quebec City. In Quebec City, French is the official language. The signs are in French. The food is très français. Even their parliament building was inspired by the Louvre. And yet, this city is more than 3,000 miles away from France, and it is surrounded by English-speaking Canada and the United States.
Howdy!
And yet, it is still known as the Paris of North America.
Bonjour!
But why? Well, here is the super short history of the Frenchiness of Quebec City. In the 1700s, as the British were taking over Canada and trying to hold on to those American colonies, the Quebec Act of 1774 was put in place to keep those French Canadians happy. The act recognized French law, French religion, and French language. And then, in the late 1900s, another law establishes French as the official language of Quebec. So that is why, as you wander through the cobblestone streets, French castles, and French country stone cottages, you are getting an amuse-bouche of France right here in Canada. You might even forget you're in North America at all. So let's begin our exploration into this French city at the spot where those French explorers began their exploration, at a very royal place. This is Place Royale, the most historic square in the entire city. Now, it is called Royale because of the statue of Louis XIV that's here, but that's not what makes it so historic. This spot where I'm standing is where Quebec City began in 1608. That's right, this is where Samuel de Champlain established his colony here in the New World. Just off the square is the oldest stone church in North America, the Notre Dame de Victoire Church, built in 1688. And doesn't it feel like a scene straight out of Beauty and the Beast here? It is incredible. You can almost feel that 400-year-old history as you stroll the cobblestone square. But Place Royale isn't the only section of Quebec City related to Champlain. There is an entire quarter with a darling old town feel named for him too. It is called Quartier Petit Champlain, and it is really like stepping back in time to the shops, taverns, and homes of that early New France settlement. This spot was the commercial center for the colony near the port, so all those fur traders set up their new lives here in the New World. One of the most famous homes is this one, the home of explorer and fur trader Louis Joliet. Which brings us to a kind of important part about the city. Quartier Petit Champlain is part of Quebec City's lower town, which is much, much lower than the main part of the city on the cliff above. And there are only two ways to get here. These super steep stairs that wind around and around like a corkscrew. One portion is actually called the Breakneck Stairs for a pretty clear reason.
Yikes!
The other way to get here is on the incredible 130-year-old Old Quebec Funicular. Built in 1879, it is 210 feet long and ends right inside old Louis Joliet's house. Not sure what he would think about that, but it sure is easier than climbing all those breakneck steps. And the reason the funicular was built brings us to why Quebec City is a city split in two. Since the very beginning in the early 1600s, Quebec has been split into the Basse Ville, the lower town, and the Haute Ville, the upper town. But why have half the city down here and the other half up here? For the answer to that, we go up to the upper town, but under the boardwalk. This may look like we're wandering around underground, but actually this was the ground level back in the 1600s when those early settlers established their fort here. So right now we're standing on the level that's just next to the cliff, and then down at the bottom of the cliff is sort of the lower part. Was it the lower part first, then the upper town, or was it all developed around the same time?
The lower town was developed first with Champlain for the fur trade purpose. Eventually the fort is built here, and with the governors that will arrive, we will really see that the city will develop in kind of a medieval type of city, with the lower town close to the harbor where the population lives, and the upper town, the defense, the fort, the big cathedral, the house of the governor. So basically the nobles will live in the upper town and have a nice view to control the St. Lawrence River as well.
So at first, Quebec City was divided literally into the lower class down here and the upper class up here. And the upper town was the perfect spot for Quebec's upper class castle. Why was a castle built? This is a very important part of the history. It was dedicated to whom, and why was it so important to build a castle here?
St. Louis Castle is the official residence of the governor. The governor who represents the king, the queen, that was in Europe. 32 of the 40 colonial governors in Canada stayed inside the St. Louis Castle. That means all the French one and most of the British one as well.
And fortunately, a lot of the foundation and a few walls are still here. This was the kitchen, this was the supersized pantry, and this is where additional rooms and halls were. It is amazing to be able to walk through them today. Sadly, the castle burned down in the mid-1800s, and later this boardwalk was put over top of it. So, no more castle for Quebec City. Or is there? In the center of Quebec City is the symbol of Quebec City, and it's a little hard to miss. It is a massive Loire Valley-style castle plunked in the middle of Canada, and it's on top of another castle which is on top of a fort. It is the grand and majestic Chateau Frontenac. Chateau Frontenac is a princess's dream castle with more than 600 rooms, upscale restaurants full of fairy tale towers and turrets, and grand, elegant spaces. From its gilded lobby to the upper-level ballrooms and entertainment spaces. One kind of looks like an ancient celebration to the gods is about to take place. Chateau Frontenac was opened in 1893, but there have been 4 beautiful additions over the years. One of those additions happened in the 1920s, which is when we get this beautiful space called the Verchères, named after a hero of New France, and what an elegant hero she must have been. But she's not the only historical figure from New France honored here. Chateau Frontenac is named after the governor of New France in the 1600s, Louis de Buade, Count of Frontenac. Frontenac is recognized for expanding New France, but when Frontenac wasn't busy ruling over the land, he was known for living in luxury and enjoying the good life. So it is fitting that this luxury hotel/castle is named after him.
He definitely enjoyed the great life and great clothes and having parties. There's over 400 years of galas, of histories of galas on the site here, and that's one of the reasons the Chateau Frontenac is literally on the site of the birthplace of Quebec, of New France. And in the wintertime, they used to really unify everyone with galas and big parties that would last for weeks.
And what better place for lavish soirees than in a castle modeled after the kings and queens of France's castles? The similarities between Chateau Frontenac and the French Renaissance chateau of the Loire Valley are quite obvious and quite lovely. But there's another bit of Chateau Frontenac's history that is a bit more practical: a railroad.
We're going to fast forward 2 centuries or so. The late 1800s, the Canadian Pacific Railway was going through. There was this grand idea of how to get maybe the elite, the upper class, to visit places, parts of Canada that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. How did that affect this beautiful chateau? Or how did that make this come to be?
There's a wonderful history there. Canadian Pacific at the time was actually the first global empire where they had boats and trains, and people could go around the world with Canadian Pacific. And so people would be taking Canadian Pacific boats from Europe, and they would arrive here to debark in Quebec City and get on the trains to go out west. And while they were developing the railroads to expand out to British Columbia eventually, what they were doing was they were picking often the best places that they were coming across, the most picturesque, to build what we call these railroad hotels.
And those majestic railway hotels included the Empress in Victoria, British Columbia, and the Hotel Vancouver, and many more, crossing Canada along the railway line. All are incredible, all are beautiful, all are très français, but only one can be truly called an icon.
I often refer to it as the Statue of Liberty of Canada.
It is.
So I'm very proud as a general manager, and I think we're the only hotel in the world that is actually in the Canadian passport, has been on the Canadian dollar, has been on a stamp, and we are really often considered the icon or the landmark of Canada and certainly the province of Quebec.
Next, from regal to religious, we visit the Musée de l'Amérique francophone and explore Quebec's Catholic roots. In the 1600s, as the New France colonies were being established, France also wanted to establish its religion here. The Notre Dame de Quebec Basilica Cathedral, the Quebec Seminary, and Chapel were all established in the 1600s to lay the foundations of a new religion here in the New World.
When you come here to Quebec City, you hear a lot about the history of, Champlain came here and there was beaver here, so we wanted the fur, and it was all about money and expanding New France. There's a very rich religious history to Quebec City as well.
Basically, Quebec City was the center of the colony. So when Bishop Laval arrived when he created the seminary in 1663, so it would be the house, the main house of the Catholic Church in all of North America. So Quebec was the first parish of all North America. And from there, the Catholic faith would have expanded throughout North America. The priests would be sent as missions all around New France, down to Louisiana, to the Labrador, to the western part. So everything started from here, and then it expanded. And Quebec was the most important city at first. It was closer to the Atlantic Ocean, and then you would come to Montreal. So it was really the center of the Catholic faith.
And that Catholic faith takes us north of the city, where there is a shrine dedicated to a very important grandmother. And it's along the St. Lawrence River for a very curious reason.
Just a few miles away from the city is a shrine dedicated to the patron saint of Quebec, Saint Anne. The original shrine was built in 1658, and then this glorious basilica was built nearby in the 1920s on a much grander scale. Why so large? Well, to accommodate all the pilgrims.
What pilgrims, you say? Thousands of believers from around the world come here to the basilica to venerate a female saint who is very important to Christianity, although you may not be familiar with her.
Who was Saint Anne?
Saint Anne is the mother of Mary, so therefore the grandmother of Jesus. What we know about Saint Anne comes not from the Bible, but the Proto-Evangelium of James, which means the first draft of his gospel. And there's where we find a lot of information about Saint Anne, and what was useful for the piety of the faithful was kind of extracted out of that book and used to promote the veneration of Saint Anne.
Saint Anne is venerated around the world. But why especially so here in Quebec, in this exact location? Well, in the 1650s, French settlers and missionaries were beginning to explore this region, just north of present-day Quebec City. Then,
it all starts in 1658. A number of the settlers, the Breton settlers, were on a boat in the St. Lawrence River, and a bad storm came up. And so they prayed to Saint Anne, their favorite patroness, to save them. And if she would save them, they would build her a chapel. And she did.
Okay.
And so they did. And to the northwest of the facade here, there's a historical marker where they believe the first chapel was built.
and as these thankful believers were building the first shrine, legend says a miracle happened.
During the laying of the foundation of the chapel, a local fellow by the name of Louis Guimont had suffered an accident on his farm and needed crutches to get around, whatever the accident was. And because of his disability, he couldn't do a lot to help with the building of the chapel, so he laid some stones in the foundation with love for good Saint Anne, who had saved his friends in their distress. And he was miraculously cured. And that's what started it all back in 1658.
And to this day, there are believers in Saint Anne's ability to cure the ill and the weak, and explains why you will see these crutches displayed here inside the basilica. But that's just the beginning of the curiosities here. Look up at the ceiling, and there's a mosaic telling the life story of Saint Anne. But doesn't it look a little different than a traditional European church ceiling? Well, because the basilica was built in the 20th century, the art style is very 20th century. It's modern, Art Deco, and dare I say, pretty cool? And on the lower level, the coolness continues with fantastical multicolored geometric patterns and lights. And this modern church now hosts more than 100,000 modern-day pilgrims each year, although the definition of pilgrim has changed slightly since the 1600s.
When you think of pilgrim, you think of somebody walking a very long distance to get to the destination. Is that the case here? Are people walking from far away, or is it a little bit of a blend?
It's interesting you pose that question because a number of years ago, maybe 15-ish years ago, walking pilgrims started again.
Some of these modern-day pilgrims walk all the way from Montreal to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré, taking about 2 to 3 weeks to get here.
They get a little booklet that they have to have stamped.
Little passport stamp for doing
stamps,
it correctly.
yeah. But the vast majority of our pilgrims come either by car or by bus.
And it still counts? It's still a pilgrimage?
It still counts.
Nobody's judging,
because they
it's
have
okay.
to walk from their car to the basilica.
There's still some walking
There's
involved.
still some walking.
For our final curious stop, we go from a Christian saint to an island named for a Roman god, and later for a French duke. This island is known as the Garden of Quebec City because everything is planted and grown here, including vineyards for wine. In fact, when Cartier landed here in the 1500s, he named the island Ile de Bacchus after Bacchus, the god of wine. Later, Cartier renamed the island Ile d'Orléans after the Duke of Orleans. By the way, that's where we get the name New Orleans too, as New France extended all the way from here down to today's Louisiana, which was named for French King Louis XIV, but I digress. Back here at Ile d'Orléans, the agricultural heritage has thrived here for centuries, and it continues today with many family-run farms, like this one.
Some things never change. The youngest of the family doesn't want to be there, no matter what. Everyone else is having a great time. I don't want to be here. Why am I working? That doesn't change.
Cassis, Mona et Fille, grows and creates delicious products from black currants, a tradition they brought over from France.
So the title of your family business almost tells the story of the family business. Who is Mona? And who are Effie and Cassis? So tell me about the history of how this wonderful business came to be.
Yes. Well, Cassis, Mona, Effie Cassis means black currants because our family grow black currant here at the entrance of Ile d'Orléans. So we grow that marvelous black little fruit that we love. And Mona, it's our family name. And Fille means and daughter because me and my sister Catherine took over the business, our father business, since 10 years now. Yeah.
Excellent. So was it your father that started the business, or does it go generations back?
Actually, in Quebec, my father is from the south of France. So we are the 5th generation of a liquor maker in the family, in the Mona's family. But my father was the first to specialize in blackcurrant and here in North America.
The Mona family began their fine wines and spirits business in 1872 in L'Hérault, France. France is, of course, synonymous with fine wine, and it is also known for a traditional little aperitif called Kir, made from black currants.
It took a French to came here and he saw the potential, the soil, and he chose some varieties that grow very well in our climate because blackcurrant need cold. Because of the St. Lawrence River, it creates a microclimate perfect for growing that kind of berries.
And what a tasty berry it is. Kir and other Cassis products are sold around the world, all grown right here in Ile d'Orléans, the garden of Quebec City. But just be careful you don't have too many of those Cassis, otherwise you might fall victim to a certain French phrase.
What does the expression to be in the currents, what does that mean? What does that mean?
In French, we say être dans les gadelles, which means be off the mark, like someone just
a little off.
Exactly,
a little
totally,
off.
yes.
Now, where does that, is that from having too much
alcohol?
Too much Kir?
Yes, because that was very traditional
okay.
here to use blackcurrant to make wine. And blackcurrant was one of the favorite fruit to do alcohol. So it's like back in the days, they say that expression to me is like a little funny,
little in the day, in the currents.
Exactly.
So how do I say in the currents en français?
Être dans les gadelles.
Être dans les gadelles.
Very nice, perfect. I love it.
So, from those early explorers who established New France, when they sailed across the Atlantic and took a big chance, to the modern-day French feel that makes it seem like you're in France, for real, to a royal square that is way up there, which is part of an upper town with its icon that can be seen from all around. Or you can go to the lower town on this fun ride, by some breakneck stairs upon which you hopefully won't slide, to an underground castle and fort, to an above-ground chateau with a great view of the port, that was designed in the French royal chateau mode and is here thanks to a railroad, to a church and a seminary that marked the start of Quebec's new religion that would play a big part, to the supersized basilica decked out in modern style, dedicated to an important grandmother who has watched over Quebec all the while. And finally, to an island named for a Roman god and a French duke so dear that produces the perfect berries for an uber-French drink called Kir. So, as you wander the beauty, the history, the oh-so-Frenchiness of this North American town, don't you ever doubt that Quebec City has so much to be curious about.
Thank you for joining us on our educational journey, and hopefully now you're even more curious about the who, what, where, why, when, and how of beautiful Quebec City. As they say here, bon baiser du Québec.